Hello and welcome to my next playthrough video. It's been a while. I've been busy for a whole range of different reasons, but hopefully be able to post up some more videos in the near future, as I've got a bit of time on my hands for the next few weeks. Taking a very different game as the subject of this video, or series of videos depending on the time. This is Hell's Gate. I'm looking at the Victory Point Games edition of this, but it was originally published in a book by Sabin. The book's called Simulating War. Philip is a professor of strategic studies at the University of King's College London here in the UK, and he runs a number of courses, some specifically on designing war games, and the book basically covers how games can be used to help simulate war and increase our understanding of it. So there's a whole range of different games inside it, and I'd definitely recommend it to anybody who's interested in, I suppose, the theory of game designs and war games in general. The situation here is the battle for the Korsun pocket, or Cherkasy pocket, as I think the Germans called the battle, although Cherkasy is down here and actually outside the pocket, whereas Korsun is in it, so that sounds like a better name for it. Hell's Gate was actually the German name for Shenderovka, which was the base for their final breakout. And it's a simple game, and it's designed as a teaching aid to sort of illustrate the dynamics of World War II combat on the Eastern Front. It's quite a good introductory game, and there's quite a lot on Board Game Geek and on other videos to sort of explain how it works, but there's probably a few things that are worth pointing out before we actually get into the game that are maybe slightly different from your standard hex and counter war game. Firstly, the sequence is fight then move rather than the other way around. Actually, it works really well, and in the book it says this is a sort of better way of describing the type of and the use of these big hexes with lots of units inside them. For me though, I think, and from reading a book on the Korsun pocket by Nicholas Setlin and Anders Frankson, what it really does is it shows how difficult movement was around here. We'll get on to some of the specifics around that later, but it was really hard getting the units into place, and often they exhausted all their supplies and their fuel just getting somewhere, and then had to be resupplied before they could really attack, and I think it brings out that dynamic really well. One of the other things that he was keen to teach is how the different sort of concentration of forces. You'll see here there's some very sort of thinly spread German forces along here, but you can have areas where they can concentrate up much more greatly. The big hexes allow you to have a lot of units in each hex, but one of the restrictions they have is that actually only 2 units can attack across any given hex side, which I suppose represents the fact that you can't actually have everybody charging over a small part, and the kind of coordination of those. So you have to think about how you're going to position units to attack. You can have multiple hexes attacking one, but only 2 in each hex can attack across. Similarly, when they're being attacked, only 2 Soviet units can actually defend in a hex, or 3 Germans. I think that's because the Soviets typically represent corps, whereas the Germans are divisions, and so there's a lot more troops represented by each counter. For the Soviets, there's also a whole series of turn-specific rules, particularly in the initial one, to kind of, I suppose, illustrate some of the restrictions that the forces had upon them as part of the historical situation that they had here. And another key element is supply. The whole aim of this is going to be to cut the Germans off, get them out of supply. But air resupply played a really important feature in keeping the Germans going here, and particularly this airport here at Korsun, which we'll cover later, was vital in keeping them at least with a minimum of supplies. So that's sort of, I suppose, the key features of the game. I'll put a note at the bottom of the video with the details of the two books, because I'd encourage everybody to have a read of those if you're interested in this. In terms of the kind of strategy for both sides, basically the Soviets are looking to cut off the Germans, so they have two main attacks, one from the east here, and that's probably just worth noting as you're looking at the board. This is actually north here, south, east, west, rather than the more traditional north at the top of the map. Just, I suppose, is the best way of fitting the map on, but when I'm talking about it, it's worth remembering that if you can just see the compass rose in the corner there. So the real aim of the Soviets is to have two breakthroughs, east and west, to allow their tank corps to basically cut off the Germans in the pocket. After that, they are looking to basically try and keep the Germans out. You'll see a lot of reinforcements here, a lot of panzer units will come flooding in either from the south, actually no, yeah, from the south or the west. So they need an outer ring to keep those aside and an inner ring to try and squeeze the Germans, because at the end of the game, if you're out of supply, you're probably going to be knocked out, although there's some breakout rules that I'll cover later that kind of simulate how the Germans did manage to get a large chunk of their forces out. The other thing that's worth doing is on each of these hexes with either the German cross or you've got the hammer and sickle are supply sources. Capturing enemy supply sources also gives you victory points, as does obviously just eliminating units straight up. So they need to keep some pressure here and here and try and squeeze that, because if the Germans can take forces away from here, it'll give them extra punch in trying to break through to the pocket. From a German point of view, you've just got to accept that your forces here are too weak to stop you getting isolated and out of supply, but you do need to try and keep this pocket as wide as possible, because one of the features of the attacks is, I mentioned that obviously only a certain number can defend, but there are two types of attack which I'll illustrate later, and the worst type is when you become over concentrated. If you get more than 4 units in a hex, you automatically trigger the equivalent of an all-out attack, which gives you greater losses. So it's important that they don't get too squashed up until right at the end for the breakout. These 3 hexes here also were ones that were supplied by the Korsun airfield, and therefore you minimise the effect of out support in those hexes. So it's important you really try and protect those to keep, I suppose, improve your defensive options. The other thing you need to think about is how you gradually bring all these reinforcements together to sort of punch a hole. It's really important to allow the breakout that you are no further than 1 hex away. So basically you look to mass them around here, punch your way through and then hold those hexes. But again, if you pull everything over here, you're likely to lose your supply sources. So it's a balancing act, as was true of the Germans in reality as well. So that's the kind of situation and the strategy. So Germans were going to basically keep that going, concentrate their armour, and then punch their way through in the end. Which takes us straight in to turn 1. So just a little bit about the history. I think I mentioned some of this. It's early 1944. Basically since the German offensive at Kursk was defeated, they've been pushed back and back across through 43, across the whole of the Russian front. And we see here they're clinging on to the last element of the Dnieper River in the Ukraine that they still held. They tried to form a defensive line along this, but never really had the troops to do it, and so gradually have lost that. But this was their last point, which actually influenced the German command in terms of stopping them withdrawing. One of the things the Soviet hadn't done, though, in the late sort of 43, was managing to create a kind of an encirclement battle like they had at Stalingrad and cutting off large amounts of the German army, therefore obviously increasing the effectiveness of the attack. And here, with this salient that was created by hanging on to the Dnieper, they spotted their opportunity. basically they brought from the west, this is the first Ukrainian front under General Nikolai Vatutin. He is going to advance through there, and then in the east we've got the first in the west, second from the east under General Ivan Konev. These two, we spotted the opportunity to cut the units off. It was also quite a good place to, because actually it was at the junction of two German armies. So here in the west you had the right flank of the 1st Panzer Army, which was under General Hans Valentin Hube, who became even more famous later in the war with some of the other battles that he commanded. And then in the south here, in the east and south, you've got the 8th Army under General Otto Wöhler. Both of these had 2 corps in the area of attack. The 2 most important were the ones that were actually cut off in the salient. So in the east here, you've got, which one was it? It's the 11th Corps under General Wilhelm Stemmermann. He became the overall commander of the pocket. And then the eastern sector, you've got 42nd Corps under General Theo Helmut Lieb. And this was a very weak connection of units all strung out there, which we'll talk about when we launch the first attacks. So that's the sort of historical situation of the units, the major units involved. And time to get on, I think, for the first turn. So, as I mentioned, there's some special rules that govern some of these early turns that restrict what we can and can't do. The main one for the Soviet attack, I should have mentioned the Soviets go first, is that whilst everybody can attack, only their tank corps can actually move, and they actually have to move in such ways that they're in different hexes at the end of the move. It's not really that much of a restriction because that's what we want them to do anyway, to try and do the breakthrough. In the east here, we've got the 5th Guards Tank Army attacking here with the 53rd Army for the infantry, and on this side we've got the 4th Guards Army that form the main element, and they're looking to punch through. Now, one of the important rules for the Germans, which reflected the kind of nature of how the units reacted, is that units can only retreat to a hex that's actually occupied by other units. They sort of retreated back to their comrades, and they can only retreat to a hex which hasn't already received a hit in combat. So I suppose they were retreating away from where they saw other attacks happening. So that can be important in terms of how the Soviets order their attacks to try and drive more units into the pocket. So we start off, and if I take you through the turn phase, we've got first up a supply and reinforcement phase where you check units are in supply. Basically they need to be able to trace a line of hexes back to a supply source. That can't go through an enemy zone of control unless that hex is occupied by one of their own units. After checking supply, we also look at any reinforcements, and you can see up here which ones come on the turn. It's really well designed, this game, in that you've got the hex they come in on underneath there, and each counter actually tells you what turn it comes in on as well, so setup of this is nice and easy. One thing probably was working at counters, it's mentioned in a number of other videos and sort of things as well. I don't personally find it a problem, but some of the colouring, particularly this with the 7th Guards, 21st Guards, sorry, and some of the German units, this is the SS Viking Brigade, Regiment I suppose if it's in a German. The sort of colours can be quite similar. Hopefully you can see all those, and the discussion that I'll be doing makes it clear, but I do like these counters. I love the thickness of them. It's really quite nice, quite a good tactile game. So generally their components are well. You've actually got this map under the plexi, which is a paper map. You've got a cardboard map that actually is like a jigsaw that fits together as well, which is useful if you're kind of just taking it away with you somewhere for a quick setup. So anyway, so back to the game. We've clearly all the Russians are in supply, and there are no reinforcements that they get this turn, so they're on to the attack. So before we do some attacks, just quickly talk you through some of the things I've been mentioning. Here is the CRT, usually your stuff with the odds, but you'll notice that there are 2 columns on each. First one is for a normal attack, second one is for an all-out attack. All-out attacks mean the attacker automatically takes a step loss, but it does mean that they have the ability to inflict much higher casualties on the defender, and far more certainty of casualties. So both sides have to weigh up when's the important time to really make sure the attack goes in. The red numbers are important for the Germans. As we'll see when we do a combat, you have the option of absorbing this last hit, so one or the second of the, or the last second of the 2, third of the 3, as a retreat. If you get a red number in your search, you have to retreat. So it's important, if you're trying to force your way into the pocket, that you get these odds and get into those red numbers, otherwise the Soviets have got enough troops to absorb the losses and hold you out. It also, I mentioned the danger of over concentration, so if you've got more than 4 units in a hex, you are automatically attacked on the second column, and without the attacker having the disadvantage, I suppose, to reflect the fact that when things got that chaotic and that concentrated, you were going to get greater casualties anyway. So that's the how the attacks work. So let's actually do the initial Soviet attacks. So I'm going to start here in the east with Konev's 2nd Ukrainian front attacking the 47th Corps and Stemmann's 11th Corps along here. Again, the key aim is to break through here to allow my tank corps to exploit through. And as I mentioned, I need to try, ideally, shepherd German units into the pocket as well. So we're going to start off with an attack on the 3rd Panzer and the 106th. Now, I haven't mentioned Panzer Corps, Panzer Division's tank corps have their attack strength. This is the attack strength or defense strength of a unit. I'll cover movement later on. These have it in brackets, which means it's basically their base defense strength and is modified when they're based on the terrain they're attacking into. If they're attacking into a clear terrain, which this is, then it's tripled. So that makes that 6, 9 against 4, so 2 to 1. I'm not going to make this an all-out attack because I don't want to take unnecessary losses at this point. This is just to see if I can get a hit here, then I know the 389th here will have to retreat. So I need a 2 to 1 on a normal attack, a 5 or 6 to inflict a hit. Get a 5, so that's off to a good start. The Germans don't want to take that as a retreat because that would lose a supply hex straight away, so they take a step loss from their infantry division. So this unit has to be moved back, and this is when the consideration about all out or otherwise comes into play. If we quickly pop that back up, you can see the only way I can absolutely guarantee is to attack on an 8 to 1 and go all out to at least get at least 2 hits. So I'm going to throw the 20th Tank Corps and 48th Rifle Corps from here, so that's 6 again, 9. Supplement that with 2 Rifle Corps from the Guards, which is another 7, so that is gets my 8 to 1, and a 5 or 6 will totally eliminate it. Anything else will give it a hit and force it to retreat. A 1, so that's 2 hits, so it has to take one of those, and it can't retreat here because we've had a hit, so it will retreat into there, and you mark it with a retreated marker. I'll mention the effects of that when we get to the German turn. But because we were attacking all out, we have to take a step loss from the Russians, and in any all out attack, if there is a tank or a panzer corps, the step loss has to come from there first. So that's reduced, but it's achieved the breakthrough. So that's achieved the objective there. We can do potentially another attack with the rest of the army here in the east. The rest of the forces in the east were the 52nd Army from the 2nd Ukrainian Front. Now there's 3 units that can attack this hex. There's 4 defence in there. Attacking over rivers would normally do a column shift if more than half, or at least half, the units, in this case it'd be 3, so it wouldn't affect it. So this is 7 to 4, which is 3 to 2, which is the minimum attacking column at a normal attack that you can have some effect. To be honest, I don't really want to take any more losses here, so this is just if I got a hit, it would be a bit of a bonus. I need to roll a 6, and I do. This is going very well for the Soviets. Now, I could retreat, but if I retreated, because this unit has already retreated, I'd automatically lose it. So, do I want to do that? I've got to take a step loss anyway, so it's, in effect, I'm losing that one, and it gives me a chance to get into some cover here, and potentially with this panzer unit maybe attack something. So actually in this case, not sure if this is the best move, but I'm going to do that, which basically means the 389th is completely destroyed. It goes in the destroyed units box, and these 2 retreat up into there and are marked by retreated. So very effective set of attacks, couldn't be better really for the Russians in the east front. Let's now see how they can do in the west. So in the west, in Vatutin's first Ukrainian front, it was a weaker assault force, and the key attack here is from the 5th Guards Tank Corps on the 198th. Again, we need to make sure that this has a maximum chance of succeeding. Best I can get is tripled, so 6 plus 3, 9. I've got a 3 to 1. So again, we'll do an all-out attack, which means Tank Corps lose a step, and I need a well, anything bar a 1 will have in a hit. Ideally I need a 4, 5 or 6 to get a double hit to force the German to retreat. I get a 2, which is a 1 hit. I think given that we've got this breakthrough here, this is going to take that hit and hold them up for another turn up there. The other attack we can do, which again, key to try and force things through here, is to try and break through on this one. 3 to 1, but there's a negative column shift because the woods makes it a 2-to-1 attack. These are single step units, so we can't do an all attack. Mind you, that's a single step unit as well, so it can't afford to take that hit. So a 5 or a 6 is what's needed for the Russians to actually have an effect here. Just snuck onto the board. This month, box a 4, so that's no effect. So attack in the west has been stalled. That's it's going to have an interesting effect for this first turn. Normally, I think every other game I played, they've managed to break through on one of these two, but not this time round. Okay, so that's the attacks. I'll widen the angle up and we'll look at the movement across the map. Okay, next up is Soviet movement. One thing I probably should have mentioned at the start actually was those of you who know the board games well will probably be looking for a movement factor on the counters, and there is none. That's because everybody can move 1 apart from tank or panzer divisions and cavalry, which get to move 2 with some restrictions. Cavalry can move 2, whatever, but tanks can move 2 so long as they only cross 1 river or enter 1 wood hex. They can do both, but they can't do 2 woods or go over 2 rivers. So, and as I mentioned earlier, it's only the Soviet tank units that can move here. So they're going to spread out and look to see what we can do about cutting the Germans off. So he's going to spread up into there, and he will move to capture the Shanka. He could move to give us a better attack here, but I think again we're going to have to attack again in this unit this time round, see if we can break through. What I will do, which no, I won't do because he's not a tank corps, is I was going to move a rifle corps, but I can't do that until next time round. So just thinking about where the German reinforcements come on, but basically they both come on in the south. They were it was the 47th Corps that basically rushed reinforcements in first, so there's not much the Germans are going to be able to do to strengthen that at the very top. Okay, so that's their only movement. They will then do the next phase is a recovery phase where you take off retreated markers from your units. They don't have any in this phase, so we're now on to the German portion of the turn. Right, so mentioned as we go into the German turn that again there's a number of specific rules in these early turns that reflected the overall command situation, and one of them was basically Hitler's reluctance to retreat, which is well known. The Germans had actually spotted the build-up of the Soviet forces a while, and actually had applied, well, the commanders of these corps had applied to retreat. That couldn't be ordered because basically the only person who could order a retreat, well, it wasn't Hitler specifically, it was the OKH, the Oberkommando des Heeres, which basically controlled the whole of the battle on the Eastern Front. So they had to apply up through their corps, their army. Army Group South, which was commanded by von Manstein, he had to then apply up to the OKH to ask for a retreat, which basically was refused. They had to stay where they were. So the net effect of that situation is that the only people who can, the only movement the Germans can make is in 1 panzer unit this turn. So we'll see what choices he has when we bring on our reinforcements. But first up we should look at supply. The Russians have blocked supply route here, but because everyone else can basically break through, there's no outer supply, which is what we normally get at this stage. So German units are all still in supply, which will help them greatly. The two reinforcements come on with the 11th and 14th Panzer divisions. Although they sound very mighty, actually the reality is these actually probably only had about between 20 and 30 operational tanks each. The state of the German tank divisions at this stage of the war was terrible in terms of the amount of broken down vehicles they had. So actually they sound great, but although they did make a big difference, and you can see they still had quite a hitting power, the actual number of tanks involved from the German side of things was quite small. So we bring them on to B7, and basically only German panzer units can attack. It could have been this one, or it could have been that one if he hadn't retreated. Because these have retreated, these in effect can do nothing. They can't attack, they can't move, they've just got to sit there. So really my only option down here is an attack, and I need to try and push these tank corps back, because next go particularly he's going to be moving up and we're going to start cutting people off. So let's attack. I can only attack by 2, so I'll attack with these two. 3 tripled, well 5 tripled to 15 to 2, so 7 to 1. So over a river, which makes it 1 shift down. 6 to 1 and 7 to 1 are the same column here, so actually it shifts down to the 4 to 1, 5 to 1 column. So a normal attack needs a 3, 4, 5 to have some effect, which I think is what I want. I get a 3, so that's a hit or retreat. The tank unit will opt to retreat. He can retreat there because there's no zones of control, even though if there was German units there, he couldn't retreat into zone control, but there's no units there, so that retreats him to there. And we're then on to the German movement phase. I can only move 1 tank unit, and so I will move him. The 2 hexes could have gone either way, so the controls don't affect music, to try and move the forces up to make sure I can support any attacks that will come up later on here. So end of German movement. German recovery, basically I get to take the retreated marker off there, and then the last phase of the game is the housekeeping phase. Key thing here is weather roll, but in this turn there is no weather roll. That comes in next time, so we move on to the second turn, and it will be Russians up next.